about to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's go, let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free.
Evening everyone, Jim here at Tutor to You. Welcome back to our latest GCSE Geography live revision session. And this term we're sort of combining a bit of knowledge, but going beyond knowledge, also developing some exam skills. And tonight we're joined by Suzanne in the middle and Vicky on the right, two well-known regular members of the team. Good to see you again. Hello?
Hello,
Okay.
sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. That's all right.
That's a good start, isn't it?
As you can see, folks, this is very carefully scripted, these sessions. Anyway, I'm looking forward to this one because I live in Boston Spa in Yorkshire here, and the weather's always beautiful. But this session is on weather hazards in the UK, so I'm looking forward to hearing about some of the awful weather that other parts of the UK experience. And so, is that basically what we're covering? Storms, floods, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, a bit of drought and heat. So heat waves. So you'll be familiar with that up in Yorkshire.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. I forgot about the fact that the sun always shines and it never rains. Yeah, good point. So as usual, we've got a variety of activities and also some exam technique advice as we go, and a chance for the live audience, as Vicky always says, to add their questions and answers into the live chat. If you're watching on replay, pause the video. And I know that Suzanne and Vicky will mention opportunities for you to pause the video as we go if we're working through some stuff. So anyway, with no further pause in this beautifully scripted introduction, I'll pass over to Suzanne and Vicky for tonight's session.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So, like we said, it is our second exam skills live. Last week, we did our first one. It was very successful, I think. So if you missed that, then please pop back to the GCU website. But this is so weather hazards in the UK, part of Unit 1A natural hazards. So it moves on from tectonics that we looked at last week. So I think Suzanne's going to kick us off with some altered vowels.
I am, yeah. So the idea of altered vowels, if you haven't played before, is you're going to be shown a number of key phrases and they have had their vowels changed to an alternative vowel. So you've got to work out what the key phrase is. So let's kick us off with question number 1, please, Jim. Right, so remember, it's the vowel that has been altered and there is another vowel. If you are playing at home, you can jot it down or catch up. Or if you are playing live, as I can see, we've got a few people ready, you can pop it into the live chat and get your answer. Okay, right, what do you reckon that is? What are the altered vowels? It's a type of weather. Right, let's have a reveal, Jim. It is, of course, thunder. So that's that rumbling or crashing noise. I do like a bit of thunder. And it's due to the expansion of rapidly heated air. Right, question number 2, please. It's an odd looking word. Remember, it's the vowels that have been altered. So you're looking at what the vowels, they've been altered to a different vowel. So if you want to, pop in the live chat box what you think your answer is. And if you're playing on catch up, you can pause it, work it out.
I think I'm going to start calling it by this one now. It's
By
much
what,
more
sorry?
interesting. I'm
Yes.
going to start using this term instead of the real one.
Prolonged runeful.
Excellent pronunciation.
Right. Okay, shall we have the reveal then? So this is actually prolonged rainfall, which when we're very tired, we probably do pronounce it as the first one. Right, question number 3, please, in altered vowels. Right, this is quite something. I'm not going to pronounce this one. So remember, it's the vowels that have been altered. What do you think they've been, what do you think the term should be? Okay. So again, if you're playing at home and you're on catch up, you can pause it and really spend some time working it out. Okay, Jim, shall we see what it is? It is, of course, drought and extreme heat. So we're going to be hearing about that a little bit later, as we are lots of the different types of weather. Right, we've got another one. What do you think on this one? What do you think this one might be? See if you can pop it in the chat box. Right. Come on then, Jim, let's have a look. Indeed, it is heavy snow and extreme cold. Fortunately, there hasn't been much of that where I live, so we haven't had to struggle this year with that. Right, and finally, this one should be a little bit easier. You've only got 2 words there and fewer vowels. So what do you think that could be? Something that has actually been in the news, a type of weather that's been in the news very, very recently. Right, shall we have a reveal? Fantastic, strong winds. There we go. Right, so we're on to our next slide, and this is looking at weather hazards in the UK and what you need to know. So, of course, when we think of extreme weather, I think our first thoughts are often about tropical storms causing devastation in places like the Caribbean or in Southeast Asia, but actually the UK experienced many different types of weather hazards too. And in this session, we're going to be looking at what different weather hazards actually affect the UK and why they occur. We're going to consider the social, economic and environmental impacts of weather hazards before thinking a little bit about how we respond to them. This is part of your GCSE spec, and you are also required to know a case study of an extreme weather event in the UK too. We're going to cover one tonight, but you might want to have a look in your notes and check that you have one too. Right, I'm going to pass over to Vicky, I think.
Perfect. So our first weather hazard that we're going to have a look at this evening is prolonged rainfall. So this is persistent rainfall over a long period of time, which can lead to river flooding. And this is because the ground is completely saturated, which hopefully you know means completely waterlogged, so it can't absorb any more water. And as a result, there is a lot more surface runoff. So the water is returning straight to the river rather than soaking into the ground or rather than infiltrating. Remember, there are lots of key words that you need to know for weather and quite a lot of the physical geography topics, in fact. This is common in the UK, especially during the late winter and early spring when snowmelt makes a problem worse. Again, like Suzanne, I live somewhere where there is very little snow. Snowmelt is a bit more of an issue up north rather than down where I live in the south. During the very wet winter of 2013 to 14, you might remember the flooding was really widespread right across much of southern southern England, particularly the Somerset levels, which lots of you will have studied as your UK weather hazard, and we're going to have a look at this a bit later in this session. So this was an example of what we call slow onset flooding. In contrast, you might have also studied river flash flooding, where intense rainfall brings a huge amount of water into an area in a really short space of time. So this is really common in upland areas where the slopes are really steep. For example, when Storm Desmond hit the Lake District in 2015, which some of you might have studied, or Boscastle, again, a really common case study. Boscastle down in Cornwall that sits at the bottom of a steep-sided valley. It's completely overwhelmed by water after more than 18 centimetres of rainfall fell in 5 hours in August 2004. There's also a third type of flooding, although this one is not actually caused by prolonged rainfall. It is coastal flooding, when deep depressions cause strong winds that bring a storm surge to the major river estuary, and that funnels up coastal water into the mouth of a river. And probably the most devastating example of this was one that happened a really long time ago in 1953, when a huge storm surge hit the east coast of the UK, and within the Thames estuary alone, 300 people died of that. So that links nicely to our next extreme weather event, which is strong winds. So we know that the UK occasionally does get battered by strong winds, and sometimes the remnants of hurricanes travel over from the Atlantic, across the Atlantic from the USA and the Caribbean. So we get these surprisingly strong winds that perhaps we're not used to seeing that much. And this weekend alone, we actually saw wind speeds of more than 200 kilometres at the top of Cairngorm, which is a peak in Scotland, which is the equivalent of a hurricane at Category 4. And again, we've looked at tropical storms in previous sessions. You will have studied one by this point in the course, I would imagine. So that's a huge amount of wind coming in there, and obviously can cause real damage. So we hopefully know that strong winds are caused by depressions, which occur in the UK on a regular basis, and these bring with them heavy rain, and which also triggers river or coastal flooding, as we've already discussed. As well as damage by water, they also lead to lots of storm damage. So, for example, in the St Jude storm in October 2013, this felled trees, it toppled lorries and double-decker buses, and it actually caused the death of 5 people who were hit by falling debris. And these storms often lead to widespread power cuts. So in autumn last year, so about November time, thousands of people were without power for more than a week in the Lake District and in southern Scotland, when huge storms brought power lines down, which led to widespread disruption to businesses. It also left people unable to heat their homes or get hot water. And the Lake District and Scotland were starting to get their first snowfall of late autumn, early winter there as well. So that was a really bad timing. I'm going to hand over to Suzanne to talk about our next extreme weather event.
All right, so something I'm perhaps more familiar with in the south. This is our third extreme weather event for the UK, which is drought. And drought is defined as an extended period of low or absent rainfall relative to the expected average for the region, which in the UK is actually 15 consecutive days with less than 0.2 millimetres of rain on any one day. Once it's become this dry, there may be insufficient water to produce crops, particularly if the levels of stored water are low, such as in reservoirs and rivers, which might have started to dry up by this point. Drought is fairly common in the southeast of England, which is the driest area in terms of rainfall, and, I'm very fortunate, is usually the hottest. Luckily, droughts are usually short-lived, although I have to say we often do have quite long hosepipe bans through the summer when it does get very dry. The longest drought on record in the UK occurred over an 18-month period in 1975 and 1976, which sadly I am old enough to remember. I was very, very young, but I do remember that time, and I remember the garden being totally yellow. Linked to droughts are incidents of heat waves, which are becoming more and more common due to climate change. In 2003, Europe suffered an extreme heat wave which led to the deaths of over 20,000 people, and many countries recorded their highest ever temperatures. However, those records are actually being broken more recently, and the highest ever recorded temperature was in the UK, was in Cambridge on the 25th of July in 2019, and it hit a massive 38.7 degrees. Some scientists are actually predicting that the UK could see its first day above 40 degrees within the next decade. That's hot. Right, now we're going to go to the opposite. Ooh, I'm going to have to put my jumper on. We're going over to extreme cold. So the final weather hazard we're going to be looking at. Many people often talk about how winters in the past were much colder and harsher than they are now. We have still had some significant periods of extreme cold, such as the winter of 2010 to 2011 and 2014 to 15. And of course, something that you may remember, I remember this quite fondly, the Beast from the East, because we all got to have a snow day or a couple of snow days. But for some people, sadly, it caused a great deal of disruption and hardship, particularly in areas of the north. There are lots of problems associated with extreme cold, which leads to stranded passengers and huge economic losses. Extreme cold also has an enormous impact on farming, with frost and snow killing off thousands of crops and livestock, such as cattle, struggling to survive in freezing temperatures. And that can actually almost wipe farmers out in terms of their income for the year. Right, so why? Sorry, Jim, if we could move on that. Yeah, why does the UK experience these weather hazards? Well, some parts of the world are very hot and some are very cold. This is because air moves around the world in huge blocks called air masses. Now, these can be warm or cold. They can also be damp or dry, depending on where they came from. And the UK unusually is affected by 5 different air masses. As you can see there, we have some coming from colder areas. So we have polar and Arctic air masses. You can see at the top of the screen. Now they're coming across water bodies. So we call them, as you can see, polar maritimes. It's coming from the pole, coming across water. And the air is wet and cold, and it will bring cold weather and showers. The one you can see to the right is Arctic, so it's coming from the Arctic. Maritime, so it's coming across a body of water. And that brings wet and cold weather and snow in winter. Now, in the middle there, you can see a polar continental. So that's coming from a colder area, but it's coming across a continent. So it's coming across a drier area, so picking up less water vapor. It's cold in winter and hot in summer, but it does bring snow in winter, but it's very dry in summer. Then we have our air masses, which are coming from tropical locations. These are coming from warmer places. Now, the tropical maritime one is the one that tends to dominate much of our weather, although obviously some of the other ones there do also bring different types of weather. The tropical one is going to be warm, it's maritime, so it's coming across the water body. So actually it holds a huge amount of water vapor. So the air it brings is warm and moist, and the weather, unfortunately, is cloudy and rainy, but the temperatures are mild. Tropical continental is our final one there. So it's coming from a warm place. Continental, it's coming across the landmass. So it's not picking up as much water vapor. So the air is going to be hot and it's going to be dry. And the weather brings beautiful, hot, sunny summer days. So you have to think about these air masses as a bit of a roundabout because it's the meeting point of all of, oops, thank you, Jim. It's the meeting point of all those different types of weather from those different directions. And this actually explains why we can experience such varied weather from week to week and almost day to day, and how we can also occasionally be affected by those really extreme weather events. Right, I'm going to pass on to Vicky and this exciting connection spinner.
Excellent, thank you very much. So we said last week that this time we're focusing a little bit less on content and more on exam skills with these sessions. And one important skill in geography is application. So we're going to try that out with one of our new games here, which gets you to think of some of the ways that you can protect against weather hazards. So we're going to show you 6 weather hazards, which are coming up on the screen now. And the wheel is going to spin, and it's going to land randomly on one of them. So whatever one it lands on, you've got to come up with a way that we can protect ourselves from it. So you just need to pop your answers into the chat window. And again, like we always say, if you're watching on catch up, you can pause and give yourself a little bit more time once the wheel has spun. So Jim, if you can get spinning for us, please. Okay, where is it going to stop? Excellent. So it's stopping on drought and extreme heat. So we're going to give you a few moments to have a think about a way that we could protect ourselves from drought and extreme heat. We're thinking back to that day that was the hottest day on record back in July 2019. The way I protected myself from drought and extreme heat that day was to sit in my daughter's paddling pool for about 5 hours. Probably not the best. We got in just before the hosepipe ban, but yeah, it was one of those days where it was far too hot. Right, let's have some answers coming into the chat window then. So how can we protect ourselves against weather hazards? So we're looking at drought and extreme heat. What can we do? Okay, Jim, can we have some answers on the board? Thank you. So firstly, and Suzanne mentioned this a moment ago, a hosepipe ban can be put in place in these infected regions, which basically means you can't water your garden, you're not supposed to wash your cars. If you ignore that, you can actually be fined by your local water company. But there are lots of other things that you can do. So water companies can apply for an official drought order in a really extreme drought, and water supplies to houses might actually even be turned off, and you have to take your turn queuing in the street at standpipes. Now, luckily, we haven't seen this for a really long time. It last happened in 1976, which is the drought that Suzanne was talking about earlier. But water companies can also encourage people to have a water meter fitted, which means that people tend to stop leaving things like taps running because you have to pay for every single bit of water you use. And they can actually repair old water pipes, because London, for example, has 6,000 kilometres of 150-year-old water pipes. So they leak horrendously and waste a lot of water that way. Okay, I think we've got one more connection spinner. Again, so we've got the same 6 hazards up on the screen. So Jim, if you can spin the wheel for us. Okay, so where are we going this time? Oh, strong winds. So what do we think? So how can we protect ourselves against strong winds? So in places like where they have tropical storms, they do lots of things to protect them from strong winds. We always quite often hear the phrase batten down the hatches, where people are putting wood over the windows and all sorts of things. But what can we do in the UK? Because that's a bit extreme for us, and we don't really have these storms so frequently. Have a think. Give you a couple more moments. Again, if you're watching on catch up, you can pause to give yourself a little bit more time. Excellent. We'll stay at home then. That's a good suggestion coming up in the chat window. Yeah, I'm not sure I really want to go out when it's windy. And in fact, I can't really go out when it's windy, because a great big bridge just across from where I live closes down, and the road is completely shut off, and everything goes through town and it gets clogged up completely. Right, so let's have a look, Jim. Perfect. So we can have severe weather warnings, which are now issued through a whole range of media. So in the past, it was only TV and radio. So now you'll get these on your phones, on the internet, all sorts of things there. And smartphones allow you to actually receive weather warnings while you're away from home, which is quite handy. But we've also got the UK Met Office, who give us those warnings, and they're constantly improving their ability to make weather predictions. So they can actually tell us days in advance when something is going to hit, which is obviously, again, very useful. Airlines, rail companies, etc. might cancel their services when very strong winds are forecast, because that is obviously going to minimise the safety risks to their customers. They don't want to be involved in accidents with trees down on the line and all sorts of things there. Okay, we mentioned the Somerset levels earlier. I'm going to hand over to Suzanne to talk to you briefly about the where these are and what the causes of these were.
Fab, thank you, Vicky. Yes, so as we said right at the beginning, you are expected to have a case study of an extreme weather event, and many of you will have looked at the Somerset levels flooding from 2014. This was one of the worst incidents of flooding in recent years, and took place between January and February in 2014, with many of the villages in the area underwater for several weeks. Somerset is in the southwest of England, and you can see it highlighted there on red on the map. The Somerset Levels and the Somerset Moors form a really extensive area of very low-lying farmland and wetlands, and they're bordered by the Bristol Channel and the Quantock Hills to the west and the Mendip Hills to the north. Now, this whole area is in the catchment of several different rivers, with the biggest being called the Tone and the Parrett, which flow towards the Severn Estuary via the town of Bridgewater. Flooding has occurred naturally here for centuries, and actually the deposition of the alluvium, that's the silt, the material brought down by the rivers, means the land is actually really excellent for farming. It's really fertile. So of course that's encouraged settlements to develop all along this floodplain. But of course, we should know that building settlements here on a floodplain has actually increased the risk of flooding considerably. So some quite good links there with your possibly with your rivers unit, which would be question toward it's section C, but I think it's question I'm going to say 5 on the GCSE. Right, if we can have a look at the next slide, please. Thank you. So we're going to have a look at the causes. What caused this devastating flood in the winter of 2014 there? So there were really a large number of factors involved here. Firstly, it was the wettest January on record. Now, records began in 1910, so there was still really, really long time. Over 100 years, it was the wettest January, and there was a low pressure system which lasted weeks, with a series of depressions coming over the Atlantic, which picked up moisture on the way, which resulted in 35 centimetres of rain falling in January and February. Now think about how big a 30 centimetre ruler is, just a bit more than that in those 2 months. That's 10 centimetres more than average. So it saturated the ground. The soil was unable to absorb any more rainfall, so it led to a massive increase in surface runoff. That's the water flowing over the surface. Secondly, there were high tides which clashed with some storm surges, sweeping in huge amounts of water back up the Bristol Channel. So it meant that the fresh water, the river water that was trying to reach the sea, was actually blocked by this surge up and ended up spilling over the riverbanks onto those floodplains, as you can see there in the photo. Finally, the local rivers hadn't been dredged for more than 20 years, meaning that they'd been clogged with sediment and other debris, such as tree branches, which meant that their capacity to hold water within the river channel was reduced. So actually less water could be held in the river channel before. So it obviously, when there was more water added and the storm surge, we can see there, ended up in those floods. Right. I think I'm going to pass over to Vicky now for some of the impact.
Thank you very much. So like we said earlier, it was the most severe hazard to ever hit this area. And as a result, flooding of the Somerset Levels was pretty much the lead story on the national news for days and days. And actually, it was covered for weeks. It was on the front page of all the national newspapers. And the reason for that was there was just so many impacts, and it was such a long-lasting flood as well. So there were lots of social, economic and environmental impacts, as you can see up on the screen at the moment. So in terms of social impacts, over 600 homes were flooded, and 16 farms had to be evacuated from that area, which meant that the residents had to be evacuated to temporary accommodation. And actually, many of them ended up staying there for several months because their houses were so badly damaged. And villages such as Moorland and Muchelney were completely cut off. Now, I do apologise if I've pronounced that one incorrectly, the second one. So it meant that daily life became pretty impossible. So, for example, going to shops or going to school. Many villages there were without power for several days. Some people without power for weeks. And again, a time when the temperatures were low, because this was January and February. So again, people not having heating and all sorts there. In terms of economic impacts, the local county council, so Somerset County Council, estimated that the cost of flood damage was more than £10 million. And there was an enormous impact in farming on the area. So 14,000 hectares of land that we used for grazing was underwater, and crops for 3 to 4 weeks. And as a result, 1,000 livestock had to be evacuated. We already mentioned that had an enormous impact on farmers. Lots of them completely had their livelihoods devastated that year. Lots of farmers sold up, didn't go back into farming after that. Local roads were cut off, and the main railway line through the area was also cut off too, which would have had a big impact on business. And then finally, in terms of environmental impacts, the floodwaters were heavily contaminated with sewage and other pollutants such as oil and chemicals. So, as well as doing lots of damage to people's homes, it would have smelt horrendous. Lots of debris had to be cleared once the floodwaters had subsided, and the stagnant water that had collected for months actually had to be re-oxygenated before being pumped back into rivers. Otherwise, it would have caused significant damage to those marine ecosystems. Jim, can we have the next slide up? Perfect. So the last thing that we're going to have a think about in the Somerset Levels case study is the responses. So you need to know causes, effects, and the responses. And we need to know long-term and immediate responses here. So immediate responses are ones that happen immediately after the event, so in the first hours, days after it's happened, included the residents being evacuated and given temporary accommodation elsewhere, which we've already mentioned. So the local community was really well supported by an army of volunteers. They set up all sorts of things like support facilities in churches and village halls, and they helped local people get to work and school and shops using boats. So you kept seeing people on the news being dragged in these big dinghies by people from the army volunteers. And actually, the army of volunteers did actually include some people from the army helping out there. Homeowners also moved their belongings upstairs, and they used sandbags to try and keep out as much of the floodwater as possible. That was often an impossible task, though. In terms of long term, so we're thinking about what happens in the months afterwards to try to reduce future flood risk. The county council developed a 20 million flood action plan, and they were supported by the Environment Agency there, because the Environment Agency are the people that maintain all the rivers across the country, and they are in charge of like flood warnings and all sorts of things. So lots of things were part of this. So dredging. So they dredged the River Tone and the River Parrett to increase the channel capacity. They raised the road levels, so in a future flood, it would stop those villages getting cut off for weeks again in the future. They put flood defences in some of the most vulnerable villages, and they also raised and strengthened riverbanks and installed pumping stations. So all of these measures should mitigate the risk of such an extreme event happening again. So let's see how well you've been listening. We're going to do a categorise activity here. We have 8 impacts on the screen. Now, things like this are really good for practicing how we categorise things in longer answer questions. So a really good way of showing your understanding and getting the top band for 9-mark questions is to refer to social, economic and environmental impacts within your answers. So we are going to give you 60 seconds on the clock. You need to pop these into the right category. Are they social, economic or environmental impacts? In the chat window, if you can just write social and then the numbers that go with it, economic, the numbers that go with it, and environmental, the numbers that go with it. So Jim, can we have 60 seconds on the timer, please? Thank you. So social, remember, are all about people. Economic, about money. Environmental is about the landscape. Okay, you've got 15 seconds to get your answers in. If you're watching at home on catch up, pause the video to give yourself a bit more time if you need to. Okay. You're right, it is very intense music for a geography quiz. That is a very good observation. So hurry you up, though, to get you to think of those quick answers. Right, Jim, can we have the answers in the correct order? Some good guesses coming through there. So social impacts, many homes has a power supply cut off, 600 houses flooded, 16 farms evacuated and villages cut off. Economic impacts, 1,000 livestock evacuated, that cost of flood damage, and then the hectares of farmland underwater for 3 to 4 weeks. And environmental impacts, floodwaters heavily contaminated by sewage, yuck, and huge amounts of debris had to be cleared. Well done on those guesses. Right, I'm going to hand over to Suzanne, who is going to try a bubble quiz with you, again, testing how well you've just been listening.
Yes.
No scary music this time.
No, there's none for this one, is there? We should have like calm, bubbly music for this. Right, so let's test your recall of what we've just talked about with this bubble quiz. Now, you're going to be given 3 questions and 4 possible answers, but it isn't a simple multiple choice quiz. Because with this one, as you'll see, as Jim's just popped up my first question, it might be that there's more than one question that's answer that's correct. It might be that there's none. It might be that there's 3. There might be that it's 4. So the idea is you decide how many of these are correct answers, and you can pop into the live chat which ones you think are correct. So question number 1, which of these were causes of the Somerset Levels flooding? Hope you were listening to me. Right, A, rivers haven't been dredged for 20 years. B, steep slopes in the valley. C, saturated ground following prolonged rainfall. Or D, huge storm surges in the Bristol Channel. So pop in the live chat the correct letters for that question. And obviously, if you are playing at home on catch up, you can pause it and take your time. Right, I'm waiting for my first person to get the correct answer in that chat. Let's see if we can get someone to get the correct answer first. Oh, I think we've got some people feeling a little nervous. So shall we see? Oh, no. I thought I had to. No, I didn't. Yes,
come on, Funky Oscar.
Oh, yeah, come on. Just give it a go. Just put a letter down. Right. Okay. Let's have a reveal, please, Jim. So the correct answers are actually A, C, and D. Sadly, Funky Oscar, not B. Right, okay, let's have a look at the next question, please. So remember, you've got to decide how many of these might be the correct answer. Which of these were immediate responses to the flood? So I know Vicky was talking about this. Is it, or are they A, tents distributed for people to sleep in? B, food parcels airlifted in? C, boats used to get to school and the shops? And D, evacuation of farms and livestock? So let's see. What do you reckon? Give it a go. Which ones might be the correct answer? Oh, I've got a couple of answers. Thank you, Funky Oscar. You got that coming in there. Right, Jim, shall we have a reveal? It is, in fact, C and D. Okay, so they're things that you would do immediately. Yeah, I don't know whether, how many of you will get a boat to school? That sounds like it'd be quite fun. Right, question number 3. So which ones of these were the long-term responses to flooding? Remember, it could be none of them, one of them, 2 of them, 3 of them, or all 4 of them. So is it widening and straightening the river channel? Dredging, B, dredging the River Tone and the Parrot? C, more pumping stations built? Or D, road levels raised? So do you want to pop in the live chat? Or if you're playing at home, just jot down which you think are the correct answers. Think about that one. Right. Are we going to have any takers in the live chat? Right, let's have a look, please, Jim. Fab. Right, so the long-term things, of course, were they dredged the River Tone and Parrot. Remember all that sediment that had built up, so they made the river channel deeper, and the road levels were raised so that those villages didn't get cut off. Wonderful. Right, I think, have we got another one? No, we're back over to Vicky. Oh, I'm looking forward to this, Vicky, because I haven't seen this one before.
I've tried it with sociology and it works quite well. It's not one that gets much in the chat though, because it's something you have to really think about. So I think it's one more for our on-demand viewers. So in this new activity, we're going to think about evaluation, which is a really important skill for your 6 markers, but also your 9 markers as well. And you will not get to the top band of your 9 markers without showing some evaluation. So you're about to see a line of an argument that a student has made as part of an answer to an essay question. Let's have a look at that first, Jim, and then we'll have a look at how we're going to evaluate it. So our student argument here is that social impacts of weather events are much more long-lasting than economic impacts. So if we can spin the wheel, we're going to have a look at which evaluation skill we are going to be using. Excellent. So evidence. So with evaluation, you need to be able to back up some of the things that you say with some evidence that either supports that point, so agrees with it, or it completely undermines it. So have a think. So social impacts of weather events are much more long lasting than the economic impacts. So the impacts to do with people are longer lasting than the impacts to do with money. So if you are watching on catch up, then give yourself a pause, have a little bit of think, maybe get some notes down. I think if we're just playing along live, have a little think. I'm going to give you a moment to see if there's anything that you could come up with that might support that, or it might undermine this point. Remember, when we're looking at those 9 markers, they need to be balanced. Okay, so arguing for, arguing against. So on catch up, give yourself a pause, have a little bit of a think about this question. Okay, Jim, can we have up on the screen some arguments to either support or reject it? So firstly, well, the cost of rebuilding is usually covered by home insurance, and businesses have insurance in place to compensate for loss of earnings. That should be loss rather than lost. Apologies there. Material goods can easily be replaced compared to things with sentimental value. So there we are, arguing there that social impacts are much more long lasting. So that's evidence to support it. Okay. We could, if we were looking at evidence that goes against it, we could perhaps look at businesses going out of, businesses going out of business, in fact, jobs being lost, all sorts, and the long-term impact that would have on people. Okay, some really interesting things when you're thinking about how you would balance your answers with some evidence. Okay, well done if you had a go at that one. I'm going to hand over to Suzanne to have a look at a bit of exam practice with you before a final quiz at the end.
Thank you. Right, so thinking about exam practice, we have a potential question here. Describe how recent extreme weather events in the UK have had impacts on human activity. Now, this, as you can see, is a 4-mark question. Now, hopefully now you'll realise that these types of questions will be level marked. So you will be required to write a response, and the examiner would read it and put it in a band, either in the lower band, which would be marks 1 and 2, or in higher band 3 or 4. So it's not point marked, and I'll be talking a little bit in a couple of minutes about some exam gold of how to approach this. But let's have a look at this question. And sort of think about what we might do to answer it. Now, first of all, we need to think about what the command word is. Command words are really important, and that's a really good skill to get into the habit of bugging your questions. So if you haven't come across that before, B stands for box the command word, U stands for underline the keywords, and G stands for glance and make sure you've read the question again and really understood what it's asking you to do. So looking at this question, describe what the exam will mean by that is set out the characteristics. That's what they say in their command word kind of glossary. So we're setting out the characteristics of how recent extreme weather event in the UK had impacts on human activity. So consider, to start with, what is it that you're going to be talking about? What is the case study, or what is your knowledge and examples that you've done in class that would be a good example to use. And you've got to think about that social element, the kind of how has it impacted on humans, on people, maybe people and the economy. You could be thinking about heavy snow. I think Beast from the East is a great one to use. You could be thinking about flooding, and maybe you could use the Somerset levels as an example, or maybe the heat waves and drought, as we've talked about before. Right, can I just have the next slide, please, Jim? So, as I said, the 4 marker is level mark, but the examiner will want to be seeing 2 kind of ideas, two sort of points that you're making which you elaborate. So you can see here it says you can start off with an example talking about drought. You would describe how this had an impact on farmers' crops, that it's potentially lowered their yield, therefore they've got a lower profit, they haven't earned as much money, or that they might have needed to irrigate their land. So that's to artificially water their crops. And obviously that costs money as well. They would have to pay extra for the water that they would be using and for the kind of the machinery and technology. Then you might move on to something like heavy snow. You could name drop Beast from the East and think about all the disruption that caused. The roads were shut down. It's very likely your school probably shut down. So it affected education, and it also affected businesses. So shops were shut, and maybe factories couldn't operate. It even, there were problems with people getting to hospital and having routine operations and things like that. So again, have a look through. I'm sure your teacher has covered some of these different types of weather hazards, and many of the textbooks and some of the guides have them in as well. And make sure that you've got a few things that you can elaborate on. Right. Okay. I think it's over to Vicky now. Oh, I like red herrings. Am I over to you, Vicky, or not?
Vicky, I think you're on mute, as they say.
Yeah. It's the only time I've muted during this presentation, and I know I shouldn't because I always forget. So, red herring is a fantastic activity to finish off on. You are going to see 4 groups of 4 phrases, all to do with UK weather hazards, and in each one there is a red herring. So it's a statement that is the odd one out. So you just need to decide which one it is, and then work out what connects the other 3 statements. So good luck. So we have winter storm, heat waves, sunny intervals and droughts. Which is the odd one out and why? So in the chat window, if you can just pop the letter, again, watching on catch up, then please pause if you need to. Although these are quite quick and easy. So winter storm, heat wave, sunny intervals or drought. Let's have a look. Okay, well done. Got some answers coming in. Jim, can we see what the correct answer is? Good. It is sunny intervals because the others are all extreme weather in the UK, whereas sunny intervals are just nice. Okay, next one, please. So we have roads cut off so people cannot get to work, businesses damaged, education disrupted, and a reduction in GDP. What do you think is the odd one out? What connects the others? This is a little bit more tricky, I think, than the last one. So think maybe about how we might categorise impacts. Think about that categorise activity that we did. So if you're watching on catch up, give yourself a pause. Jim, can we have the answers up? Excellent. So education is disrupted as schools are closed. The others are all economic effects, whereas that is a social effect. Okay, next one. So we've got a decline in the insect population, people's life expectancy reduced, ecosystems permanently damaged, and a decline in wildflower varieties. So some things there that we haven't talked about in this session, but they can all be effects of extreme weather events in the UK. So what do we think? Is there one that stands out as not being the same as the other? Okay, if you're watching on catch up, pause for a moment. Jim, can you show us what the answer is? So it is Oh, it's different there. So, life expectancy. We had life expectancy reduced. For some reason, it's come up as injury or loss of life on this one. So I'm not really sure what's happened there. I think the macro on the PowerPoint maybe is bugged slightly. But the others are all environmental effects of weather hazards. Excellent. Right, last one. Okay, so the last question of the session. So we've got schools closed, so education is disrupted. Business is damaged, health services are overwhelmed, and injury or loss of life. What do we think? Which one there is the odd one out? Again, if you're watching on catch-up, pause. Jim, can we have the odd one out revealed? It is business is damaged. The others are all social effects of weather hazards. Excellent work. Well done on those of you that have joined in this evening. Excellent work. Thank you very much.
Superb stuff. Yeah, it's a really useful categorisation, isn't it? They're social, environmental, economic, as a way of giving examples, also categorising the different impacts.
Yeah, it's also really helpful for some of those 9 markers, because actually you can approach those, can't you, Vicky, by looking at things from different angles or different geographical lenses. Yeah, so
it's quite a good way of organising an answer as well, isn't it? With 3 paragraphs that are separate about each one.
Yeah, definitely.
I remember the Somerset levels. It was all over the news, wasn't it, for weeks and weeks, and it's really, really difficult. I think from memory, the floods flooded Bridgewater and the largest fashion store there, Superdry, and they renamed the store Super Wet, I seem to recall.
Oh, I wonder when the joke was coming.
But they're okay, because they actually
won tonight. That's really it's not.
They actually cleaned all the stock that was affected with the detergent Tide they used. There we go. Anyway,
that's a very dated reference.
Good point. Yeah. Excellent, fantastic stuff. Real as useful. Fantastic load of exam advice as well as analysis, application. Lots of application in there. The first spin of the value wheel as well. That's a great activity to use.
That is.
Really useful stuff. Many thanks. Fantastic session as always, Suzanne, Vicky. Thanks for putting that one together. So what are we on next week? I think we have are we still on not weather hazard again? Surely something different now, is it?
Kind of. We're on causes of climate change. So it's still natural hazards, but we've done tectonic hazards, we've done weather hazards. The next part of it is climate change. That's a little standalone section in that big unit. So we're going to look at causes next week, and the week after we're going to look at how we might mitigate it.
Okay, so a couple of sessions on climate change. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Look forward to that. As always, usual time on a Thursday, 6:30. So if you can join us live again, fantastic. If you're watching on catch up, well, great to see you, and hopefully you found it useful. Give us a thumbs up if you found the session useful. Don't forget to go to tutor2u.net/live and go to the replay section to download all the other sessions that Vicky and Suzanne and Shanique and Jacob and the rest of the team have put together. I think we're about 35 or 40 now for GCSE Geography.
Yeah.
So there's bound to be one there you can use to help with your revision or maybe using a lesson. But anyway, great to see you all, and we'll catch you same time next week. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.